Buongiorno a tutti e benvenuti. L'evento sarà in inglese, quindi passo subito all'inglese. Good morning everybody and welcome to our event, Transparency of ESG Investment Products, Voluntary and Regulatory Standards. The event is managed by CFA Society Italy, and I would like, first of all, to thank Salone SRI for hosting us and for their commitment in improving the engagement to sustainable responsible investments. I would also like to thank our partners of today's conference in alphabetical order: Carmignac, Etica, SGR, and NN Investment Partners. The format of this event will be an introduction from CFA Institute, and then a round table with our partners. So in order to avoid to lose time, I would like to introduce Chris Fidler, who is a senior director of CFA Institute, and he will present us CFA standards on ESG disclosure. So Chris, up to you to start the event. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Riccardi. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Good morning. My name is Chris Fidler, and I'm a senior director in CFA Institute's Global Industry Standards team. For those of you who are not familiar with CFA Institute, we are the global association of investment professionals that set the standard for professional excellence and credentials. The organization has been a champion of ethical behavior in investment markets and a respected source of knowledge in the financial community. Our aim is to create an environment where investors' interests come first, markets function at their best, and economies grow. There are more than 178,000 charter holders worldwide, and there are 159 local societies around the world. Now, while we may be best known for our rigorous credentialing of investment professionals, research, advocacy, and standard setting are also very much a part of what we do. And I'd like to give you a quick overview of CFA Institute Code and Standards. At the heart of them all is the Code of Ethics and Standards of Professional Conduct. This is mandatory for our members and charter holders, and it sets out principles of ethics and professional conduct, including principles and requirements for disclosure of information about products and the investing process. The Asset Manager Code extends these codes and principles to the asset manager as an organization. And the Pension Trustee Code of Conduct and the Endowment Trustee Code of Conduct, again, extend those same principles to trustees of pensions and endowments. Also covered in the Code of Ethics and Standards of Professional Conduct are requirements around the fair, accurate, and transparent presentation of investment performance information. And that principle is detailed much further in the Global Investment Performance Standards. The GIPS standards, as we call them, were developed more than 20 years ago, and they have been adopted by over 1,800 organizations in 48 markets. And the Asset Manager Code has been adopted by over 1,000 organizations in 51 markets. Now, about 18 months ago, we considered where we might else add to our standards, or I should rather say, the situations in the marketplace that need more guidance when it comes to disclosure. And after considering several different opportunities, we decided that ESG disclosures were an area where investment professionals were in need of further guidance. So I'd like to start by providing context around what we saw as that problem. So first, investors, of course, always consider risk, return, the time horizon, liquidity, and taxes. These are what I would call traditional investing concerns. They have always been at the forefront of investors' minds and the forefront of investment professionals' objectives when they are designing and managing products. But more and more in the back of the investor's head are additional considerations like environmental and social risks, like the impacts that the underlying activities might have on the world. Their organization's mission, if they are, for example, a trustee representing an organization, or perhaps their personal beliefs. A desire for altruism or philanthropy for them to conduct that side by side with their investing. And last but not least, long-term trends that are going on. And at this point in time, there are many important trends that are related to environmental, social, and governance factors. Now, the problem is when they look out into the marketplace, they see a lot of terms and labels on products like screening and best in class and integration and impact and active ownership that are could be confusing to them because these terms are not really well defined. And furthermore, they don't always get the information that they need in a product's disclosures to fully evaluate whether or not a product would meet these additional needs that they have in the back of their head. So as we've seen a literal explosion of these types of products in the marketplace, and all the stakeholders that we talked to said that there was this gap in the language and information between investors and asset managers. And because we have a standard like the GIPS standards that has been so successful in addressing this gap when it comes to historical investment performance, we thought that we could extend the GIPS standards, if you will, to this area of investment product disclosures when it comes to these ESG related features or needs. Now, importantly, we are not developing this standard in a vacuum. There is already a rich and varied landscape of regulations and standards and codes that are solving for different aspects of this, I'll call ESG ecosystem or system of information. And this slide just shows a sample of some of the code standards and regulations that we've evaluated. In fact, I've personally assessed 125 of them. So when people say it's confusing, I understand. Now, of those 125, I would say that there's about a dozen that we feel are very relevant to our effort. Most of those are regulations. And of course, the one or the few that I will point out here for our European audience is, of course, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, or SFDR, and the Taxonomy Regulation. These, as I'm sure many of you know, have requirements, disclosure requirements for really all investment products when it comes to sustainability risks, but also additional disclosures when it comes to products that have environmental and social characteristics or that have sustainable investment as an objective. When you look at how many standards address this particular area, there's really only one out there that has attempted to tackle this area, and that's the EuroCIF European SRI Transparency Code, which is good in very many respects. Now, our mission as a global organization is to provide guidance to investment professionals all around the world. So in one sense, we want to take our principles and expand them to a global audience. So while there's great things in the European Transparency Code, we want to extend that further geographically. And while there are great requirements in SFDR, the Taxonomy Regulation, they are specifically geared towards sustainability, which we know is an extremely important concern for investors. But as we saw in the last slide, it's not the only concern that investors have. So our aim is to try and tackle all the concerns that an investor might have for all the different varieties of products we see out there for all different markets around the world. And let me further elaborate then about what you will see in our standard and what you won't see in our standard. First, we are going to define ESG related features and other key terms. So it's not our mission to create a dictionary that would be appropriate for everybody in every situation. We understand that different areas use different terms, and in a sense, that's okay to some degree. But what we want to do is, if people or areas are using different terms, to be able to have a common translator, if you will. And that's what we think we can provide by defining key terms, as well as defining key features. And what do I mean by feature? Well, really, it's a catch-all term that could cover a product's objective, like an impact objective, could cover a constraint, like an exclusion, or a methodology, like integration. So we need some sort of term to capture all those things, and then we can further define and elaborate on them. Secondly, we are going to classify these features by investor need. So again, one of our main aims is to help investors find the products that are suitable for them in the marketplace. And so we do that by, we've done that in the consultation paper, I'll say, by listing out those features and then mapping which features would align to those needs. Now, that might not ultimately appear actually in the standard. We'll probably position it more in a investor user guide and let the standard speak just to the disclosure of information. Speaking of disclosures, there will be requirements for the disclosure of certain information. Now, it's very simple. If a product has one of these features that relates to ESG in some way, shape, or form, there will just be requirements for additional information to be presented, again, so that an investor can evaluate if it's suitable for them. And then finally, we envision that there will be procedures for independent examination of the information that has been disclosed. So in any disclosure regime, right, you run the risk of errors or omissions or misrepresentations. And so the receivers of information often find it beneficial to have that information audited by an independent third party. And that's what we're talking about here. Now, we haven't set on this, we haven't made a lot of decisions about exactly how that would work. But if we look to the GIPS standards, that is a voluntary, it's a voluntary requirement of a voluntary standard. Now, so keep in mind, we're a member-based organization. We have no authority to mandate for any organization to do anything. But what we do have is standards that people are willing to voluntarily adopt. And the reason organizations have adopted these standards is because they find them beneficial. And our ESG standard will also be beneficial to both investors and managers. And let me talk a little bit further about that. So for investors, again, we want to be able to offer them a way to clearly identify and communicate their ESG related needs and more easily identify products that would meet those needs. We want to give them a way that they could have information and in a sense, side by side, compare information between the different products that they're considering. And again, evaluate which one is best for them and be confident that the information that they are reviewing is a fair representation of the product's design and their benefits. For asset managers, it will be valuable as well because it will help them more clearly communicate their products to the marketplace, to their target audience. And it will help them do that more easily across geographic borders and boundaries, particularly as terminology varies and words vary from culture to culture. We believe it will save them some time and effort in responding to different questionnaires and due diligence requests. And it will allow them to signal a voluntary commitment to best ethical practices when it comes to disclosure of information. And finally, for consultants and advisors who serve as intermediaries, often between investors and asset managers, it will allow them to more clearly understand their clients' needs and find products in the marketplace that will suit those needs and be confident in their recommendations. So I want to conclude with an update, a very recent update. We put out a consultation paper in August that was the culmination of a 15-member working group that, for the past 6 months, put together the principles and concepts in the consultation paper. And we put that out for a 60-day comment period where anybody, any organization, individual could respond to the questions we ask or just make general questions or general comments about our initiative. And we were really very pleased with the comments that we received in terms of quantity and quality and the diversity of the respondents. We got over 110 comment letters, and of those letters, the disclosure providers, that would be the asset managers and industry associations, they were about 37% of the respondents. The disclosure users, in other words, the investors, consultants, advisors, and regulators, they represented 31% of the responses. And what we saw was really an overwhelming support for a disclosure-based voluntary global standard. Now, there was a pocket of, of resistance. There was 4 out of 10 industry associations were critical of the effort, and we posted everybody's response to our comment letter unless they said that we should not publish it. So you can go to our website and read people's responses. But when you look at asset managers who responded outside of industry organizations, only 1 out of 29 was really critical of the effort. So overwhelming support, really about 90% supportive of this disclosure-based standard. And so we are moving forward, and we are incorporating the many high quality comments into what we call an exposure draft, which will be the first draft of the standard. And we aim to have that out in May for another public comment period, where we will again use feedback to create a final draft that we hope to have out in November. And I think that is the way that we involve volunteers and participants in the industry from different stakeholder groups. And the way that we put our standards out for comment and have a very transparent process is one of our strengths as a standard setter, because in that process, we know that it's not CFA Institute that is saying this is how something should be done in the marketplace, but we're letting the participants in the marketplace figure out a standard, a way to communicate with each other that balances the costs and benefits for all the parties involved. And so with that, I will conclude my presentation, and I will turn it back over to Mr. Riccardi for discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. And first of all, let me thank you particularly because you are based in the US, so you are live, and so everybody can imagine what time you get up this morning. It's 4:30 more or less for you, so we appreciate that. And let's start with our roundtable. So I am very pleased to introduce Sandra Crowl, who is a Stewardship Director from Carmignac. Then Aldo Bonati, Corporate Engagement and Networks Manager for Etica SGR. And then Adrie Heinsbroek, Principal Responsible Investment of NN Investment Partner. we have thought to have the first question of our round table the same for everybody, and then a second round of questions which are different for all our panelists. So let's start with the first question, the first one. Where do you think the language and information gap is most acute? And what practices do you employ to address this gap? And do you think that they work or unluckily they do not? I think we can start from Sandra Carmignac. Thanks.
Grazie, buongiorno signor Riccardi e a tutti e a tutti. I think the most glaring gap, and Chris touched on it in his presentation, the most glaring gap is really to understand impact, because we are getting a plethora of funds that are reporting their impact on their investments as they have been requested to by some national labels, for example. But we mustn't confuse impact with ESG performance, ESG indicator performance. Let me give you a simple example. If I was I managed a pharmaceutical company and provided a drug that was a very, very useful drug to treat diabetes, for example. The output of that drug manufacturer is indeed the drug itself. The outcome of that drug is indeed how many people have been treated. But the impact of that drug is indeed what is the quality of life of those people having taken the insulin, having taken a particular drug. How has it changed their lifestyle? How has it changed their potential to live normally? So really the outcome is being confused at the moment with impacts. So we have to be very, very clear as to how we can monitor that. And what we're doing is creating a survey, for example, to understand what our investors are understanding by impact, and perhaps opening some of their eyes to understand the intentionality behind a company when they're providing a particular service or a good, and what is the outcome and then the impact they are hoping to achieve. What is the additionality they are adding to society from this drug? So the impact monitoring, whether it's through an SDG lens, whether it's through a percentage of revenue towards a particular good or service, is very important to understand. So we're trying to educate perhaps some of the investors to understand what they think impact is, and we're also providing, most importantly, transparency, as Chris mentioned, through very strong documents like the transparency codes. We have fairly transparent SRI guidelines on our website, and perhaps we'll have a chance to talk about prospectuses shortly. But the thing is to be transparent and to be clear about what we're reporting. ESG indicators, performance against a benchmark, is not impact.
Thanks, Sandra. Adrie, you and investment partners.
Thank you so much, Matteo, and good morning to you all. And Chris, let's make this a panel that keeps you awake. So let's see if we can make that happen in a combined effort. I understand what Sandra was saying, and also on the CFA Society. So there is nowadays a real high demand for information on what is ESG, sustainability, all these topics. And we also see that there's a huge effort to inform people or to guide the industry or to make sure that we all understand that. And I think that's the role of asset managers nowadays. Inform our clients, inform the public, make sure that's understand. But it's also about providing guidance to ensure that things are understood into. And I think that's also, in my view, the responsibility of asset managers who are leading on this topic. So role and responsibility of also not only the CFA, but also of the asset managers themselves needs to be taken into consideration. For instance, on general awareness, today, Salone SRI. I think that's extremely important to put that into perspective. Also making sure that, for instance, what we did as NN Investment Partners, we did during the summer this RI summer course, including a professor from the Rome University to explain certain topics, terminology, and putting it into perspective for investors. So actually a bit, the CFA is really geared towards us as an industry, but putting it in a bit broader perspective. I think sometimes that is needed, especially with topics that are now really, sort of new. But let us not forget that, interesting enough, a bit on what Sandra said, it is putting things into perspective and connecting it to the portfolios, connecting it to our day-to-day job, connecting it to what we are doing. And I think that's why, in my view, what we nowadays already see is informing the public, informing clients, is putting out RI reports, putting out podcasts. I mean, most of my colleagues work from home. Clients also partly work from home. So we have to make sure that they can digest information in a way that fits with them, just finding out new ways. And I think that in that sense, my plea would also be, let's keep on collaborating. Like today, we collaborate combined, but also putting CFA Society next to, for instance, in Italy, you have the Forum per la Finanza Sostenibile. I probably pronounce it wrong, but it is about the groups that really can add value to our clients, to the professional advisors, and collaborate combined. Because if we can combined inform the public, I think then we win the most. Back to you, Matteo.
Thanks, Adrie. No, your Italian is excellent, so you have pronounced very well, indeed. And then the last panelist, Aldo Bonati from Etica SGR. If Aldo, please, you want to add something?
Sure. Thank you, Matteo. Thanks to CFA Society Italy for having me, and to SALONE SRI for organizing this event. Well, I would like to take on from what Sandra and Adrie say, and just add something about my view on where the information gap is most acute. I think that the information gap is most acute in the terminology, and specifically between asset managers and investors, and in particular retail investors. So I think that the role of FAs, financial advisors, here is central in order to convey information and to be an educator and an intermediary between the asset managers and the final investors. Chris, you fairly added in your slide some terminology like ethical investments, sustainable investment, responsible investments, then thematic investments. So we should be clear about what we have a common ground on what are the main SRI strategies. And then everybody could develop their own view on these strategies. But I've seen some nice reporting on these, saying this fund is applying this, and this strategy. So as long as we, all over the world, and I really much appreciate this global view that the CFA Society is taking, we should agree on what is controversial sector exclusions, norm-based exclusions, ESG integration, ESG best in class, thematic investments, engagement, and impact investing, which is different from calculating the impact of a traditional mutual fund, in my view. Then about what practices we do employ to address this gap at Etica. Well, I would say information, disclosure, bottom line, transparency. Pre-contractual information, I will just say what Etica is doing, but I know that many other asset managers are doing something similar. So in the prospectus, you can see where ESG stands. On the website, a lot of information is published on our website, which sector are excluded, the main ESG indicators that we do apply to integrate ESG in our investment process. In the fact sheets, we have policies, we have an engagement policy, which guides our engagement activity. And then also in the periodic reporting. Since before the Paris Agreement, we joined the Montreal Carbon Pledge, and therefore we are publishing a carbon footprint on an annual basis of our fund, and now it became a TCFD report. So it's no longer the carbon footprint, but it's about governance, strategy, risk management, and let's say indicators and KPIs. Then we do publish periodically our engagement report with the results of our dialogue with companies during the year. And I encourage you to have a look at it because I'm particularly proud of it. And we just published the new version. Then we publish our votes. The very next day from the AGM day, you can see how we did vote at that AGM. And we focus particularly on the votes, on explaining why we didn't support some items on the agenda. We publish an impact report trying to explain the impact that you can have by investing in our funds. Then this information is also in the annual reports and our yearly reports of our mutual funds. And this year, for the 13th year, we adhered and we are publishing information in compliance with the EuroCF SRI transparency code that Chris just mentioned. So we do very much like this reporting and this standardization. And in terms of what works, I think that the content, the content is much sexier now to some extent, because you're no longer talking just about, risk, return, and volatility, but you're talking also about climate change, biodiversity, racial inequality. So also for retail clients is nice to see how this very central topic in our society can impact their investments. In terms of what doesn't work, I would say that maybe there is a lot of information to digest. So I would very much like to recommend simplicity in information in order to add efficiency to the information. And what it might work in terms of, don't work in terms of effectiveness, is a lack of coherence. Because maybe you have a nice policy, but then you do vote, your votes are not so coherent with the policy you express. So this is something that for asset managers should be really taken as a paramount when they plan their communication to retail clients, so to final clients, but also to the intermediaries, so to the FAs.
Thanks, Aldo, and thank you all for this first question. Before starting the second round, let me just mention that yesterday the FT published an article on these new ESG standards, the disclosing from Chris. It was obviously not asked by ourselves as a CFA Society Italy, but the coincidence is very good today, also because in this article there was let's say a mixed picture among different points of view on this subject, which of course is still quite new and so very challenging. And so I am pleased that today we can also have the point of view of our free partners in order to understand how this new effort from CFA Institute has been perceived by the professionals community. So let's start with you, Adrie, if you agree with the second question. We can talk a little bit about regulation. Also, Chris mentioned the sustainable finance disclosure regulation from the EU. So what do you think about that, do you think that the SFDR will be successful in addressing the gap which we have just mentioned or not? And will it be useful to address greenwashing? Will there be some unintended consequences from this regulation? So up to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Matteo. Quite a extensive question, and I noted it a bit down. So allow me then to get back to you in sort of steps. But first, interesting enough, you mentioned the SFDR, and compared to what Chris understands, the SFDR EU regulation is not voluntary. Chris mentioned that the standards are voluntary. The SFDR is not, so we have to comply. I think that's a major distinction. Another thing, what I think is, will SFDR be successful? I noted that down from the first part of your question in addressing this gap. It helps. It helps. It helps. So what I find especially positive is that it puts, by adding disclosures or transparency, like Aldo said, it all comes down to transparency and credibility. It puts it on the same level as all the other relevant information. And for me, working for 26 years in responsible investing, this is a major step forward. So finally, it has the same weight, it has the same influence, it has the same importance. And that is a real step forward. Does it address the gap? Probably. It helps to address the gap. It is taking things seriously. And the other thing is, remember, years ago when sustainability reporting started, the report was exactly like Sandra said at a certain moment, the outcome or the result. But internal processes at asset managers, or now with complying with the SFDR, helps them to put risk management into place, also on ESG and all other kind of information. So what you don't see, it is like a submarine. You don't see below the sea level what is all happening down there. You only see above sea, and then you don't see the submarine. So for us, as a really experienced investor on ESG, it does not make up so many difficulties, but it helps us to address these topics and be more transparent. So that on the first part. You said, where does it not help? In my view, I combine it with greenwashing. I don't think this really helps against greenwashing. Again, it helps, but I think the aim is not prevent greenwashing. The aim is to put disclosures, information, transparency, so that investors and advisors can make better informed decisions and know how this fund puts their capital to work in the economy, how they are making their investment decisions. You can still, in my view, and therefore the standards of CFA can be an add-on and combined. Yes, I think that will help a lot, because don't underestimate, although it's voluntary, Chris, your standards are very important for professionals like me in the industry. So I would not emphasize the non-voluntarity, but I would emphasize the relevance of the standards. So having said that, that combined can help. And I think I'm now, if I wrote down unintended consequences, that was also part of your question, Matteo. Interesting enough, and I hope I don't be too rude, or as a Dutch person, maybe unpolitely friendly. In my view, one of the unintended consequences of the SFDR is that both leaders and laggards on ESG are now suddenly sort of the same. So for the outside world, it is not easy to see who is really already have a lot of experience and expertise on this topic, and the ones who are just starting and just doing the necessary disclosures. Because disclosures in prospectus has to be via a legal thing. So I hope that by also addressing this in these kind of salon at the SRI, having these conversations, that people do understand how these things are put in perspective and connected to portfolios, and that we should inform, maybe not the SFDR is for the end clients, but especially also on the advisors. Make sure that the advisors and the professionals in the industry understand what it is. So it's not about the end text in the disclosure, but what is behind that and how are the things being done. And then just allow me to repeat my plea for collaboration. And I think that here, things like this conference, things like the CFA Society in their meetings, and also with the Forum pour Finanza Sostenibile, it's quite difficult to pronounce, I have to say, is quite important to make sure that this is addressed and that people understand that ESG is here to stay and this is the way forward, and we really should take steps, and we are taking steps. Sorry for the long answer, but it was quite a difficult question.
Thank you, Adrie. We are perfectly on time, I think. So thank you. And we have 20 minutes remaining, so 10 minutes for each answers, more or less. And Sandra from Carmignac, please. I know that you have just approved some new prospectus. So can you please tell us the disclosures you have made in your newly approved prospectus to satisfy the disclosure rules, and how extensive has it had to be, and what will change when taxonomy reporting will be applied as an additional step? Thanks.
Well, Matteo, if we have to include taxonomy, we're going to need another half an hour at least, I can tell you. But look, it's a quest, in fact, that every fund manager is now meeting, given that we will need to render our prospectuses much more clear and detailed. Very similar, in actual fact, I said to my sales team the other day that it's our new marketing document, a prospectus. And in the past, when we look at different countries, they take different formats and different detail. And I really welcome the technical standards that have given us, even though it has not necessarily been finalized, given us quite a clear template, which will be so beneficial, not only for the regulators to understand what each asset management is applying within the funds, but also for our investors as the key components of that prospectus inclusion of extra financial analysis, ESG analysis, and the implementation. That's what's composing the ESG section now, which is a new section in the prospectus for quite a deal of fund managers. And that is what's being taken across to the KID, and which is going to be replicated within marketing documents. So if I take a step back and I look back in the previous years, there probably, and I join Adrie in the view about greenwashing, is the clarity in a prospectus going to improve some of the promises that fund managers have made in the marketing document, but in fact don't follow through with, because they just simply are not enforced within the company. Now, we have written a prospectus which replicates our investment process, and you will find that same replication in the marketing documents. I think one of the regulators have suggested that there is nothing that's key in the marketing document that is not included in a prospectus. So you'll see, in fact, the contents of both documents should be very similar. And as an investor, if you're not seeing that, then there should be questions to be asked. Now, if I talk about the actual components within the prospectus, the first opportunity is in actual fact to clarify your funds. In each particular prospectus, you will clarify your funds, which is what we have, whether they are Article 8 or Article 9 in the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Rules. Article 8, of course, being environmental and social characteristics, funds with environmental and social characteristics, and also Article 9, a fund that has a sustainable objective, a measurable sustainable objective. So that's the first important opening statement of the objective or the type of fund, so that investors can understand, in fact, what approach and what type of framework that you're placing. The approach then can be broken down into the type of best in class, best in universe, best efforts, what type of active voting, when you would anticipate that we would be engaging. So that's all within the type of approach. Then we move on to the implementation of ESG. Now, this is very important for investors to understand and to read, because it should be written in relatively simple language. So we would go into the detail about how do you implement ESG integration. How do you implement sustainable investing? Well, we implement it through either negative screening, through our coal, tobacco, weapons exclusions. We also may negative screen for ESG quality. We also may negative screen for norms-based global sanctions, traditional capacity for companies to obey the labor rights and other global norms. So this is an important part. It's all written in quite a decent amount of detail. And then we can look also in that section on the implementation of ESG investment into the investment strategy is what is the positive screening that we apply within a fund. For Carmignac, the positive screening is through the lens of sustainable development goals. And we also explain how we reduce the investment universe by 20%, reducing the poor quality ESG related infractions of companies that haven't dealt with or mitigated their ESG risks for probably the most part of that 20% exclusion. We, as Aldo has mentioned, we also have rendered quite transparent the indicators that we use within the prospectus and also on a website of the indicators that we use for our proprietary ESG scoring. So things like water and waste metrics and human capital policies. I'm sure you're all very familiar with them, but it's what we do with those indicators that's most important. 3 or 4 other points to mention. Firstly, the coverage of the investment universe. So it's above 90% where our holdings are analyzed for ESG. So that's another prospectus guideline, and as it's written in the prospectus, it's obviously followed, and particularly naturally because mostly all of our funds have sustainability labels. The last point was a very important one for us, for a low carbon approach that we adopt in virtually all of our funds. We have also put a strong guideline target, in actual fact, of low carbon emissions, 30% below our benchmark. So that gives you an idea. These prospectuses will be actually published tomorrow, so you'll be able to have a look at them tomorrow. There is one fund that has a taxonomy. We can just touch on that briefly. I'm conscious of time. That we have one fund that indeed invests in companies that are providing goods and services in the activities that is qualified by the taxonomy standards. Now, here is a very important point for investors and also for investee companies. Today, investee companies are not declaring for specific taxonomy standard activities their revenues, their capex, and their opex. They are being asked to do that in the taxonomy laws as from 2022. The asset managers are being asked to report their taxonomy alignment in 2021, at the end of next year. So we can see that there is a mismatch indeed with the enforced disclosure in the taxonomy law. So to Adrie's point, it is enforced for investee companies. It's one of the singular areas where it is enforced for investee companies. But indeed, we won't have that information unless we interview and get granular information from companies today to be able to report a fully aligned taxonomy portfolio at the end of this year. So there are some hurdles, there are some challenges, and there's a lot of granular work that we do from proprietary analysis to achieve that transparency and that promise we've made in our fund that has a taxonomy related goal and Article 9.
Thank you, Sandra. Thanks a lot. And the last question for Aldo Bonati from Etica SGR. Aldo, if you agree, I would like to talk with you about disclosure connected with financial products. And so what is the investment professionals' ethical responsibilities with respect to product disclosure in your point of view? And how do you think a disclosure standard could help advisors and product platforms? Thanks.
Well, thank you, Matteo. First question is really, wow, it's really deep. Investment professionals, ethical responsibilities. I think, well, the ethical responsibility of investment professional should always be to have the interest of the client at their center. And I understand that this is not easy. And because especially FAs, they are subject to pressures to sell specific products maybe. So there might be a conflicting interest. And I would say maybe especially in the Italian market, where possibly financial literacy is average level is lower, they have much more power because information is power, and there is an asymmetry of information that they should use wisely. In order to do that, Etica is trying to organize events. We have an academy, we have an online academy. We just launched an upgraded version of an online tool dedicated to do sales channels. But bottom line is have the client's interests. Always client interest should be paramount to your activity. Then about how a standard could help advisors and product platforms. I will repeat myself, and well, a quick spoiler. Back in September, I just had my CFA ESG certification from the CFA UK Society, and I would say that helped me. I mean, I'm doing this job for over 15 years now in SRI, and it helped me to stop, reflect, think about what's happening in the market and what's the standard. So this is always useful. Then I would mention that having a standard is relevant to set a level playing field. So having a template, and also for users of the standard to have a map where they know that they could find information. So where could I find this information? And then maybe this information, the story will be different from company to company, from asset manager to asset manager. But I will know that in this section of this document, I will find this story about this company, how they do ESG integration, let's say. This information will provide me the power to decide what is most in line with my thoughts or beliefs. Then I think that a standard shouldn't be too prescriptive. So should allow some flexibility, avoid technical or esoteric language. I don't think that retail investors in Italy or in Europe can really know what a brown activity is, a green activity is. So it shouldn't be too prescriptive on this. And lastly, I think that well, we shouldn't have too many standards. Chris mentioned over 120 standards they found at CFA, 12 very relevant. On products, we have already Euro CFA SRI Transparency Code for Europe. In Europe, again, the SFDR regulation. Then we have the CFA ESG standards for disclosure standards. So I would expect a convergence of these standards, and I would like to see a convergence of these standards. I don't think this will be very different from what is happening for corporate ESG or non-financial disclosure standards. So we have the SASB, the GRI, the IIRC, and they are now talking together, but it will take time. So level playing field, not too prescriptive, and please, not too many standards. But standards are relevant. I mean, they are relevant, and they can help, let's say, create a common language.
Thank you, Aldo, and thanks to you all. I do realize that the questions were very broad, and sorry about that, but I really appreciate your skills and your ability to have said in a few minutes the most important topic. So really appreciate it. Thanks again. So thank you, Adrie from NN Investment Partners. Thank you, Aldo from Etica. And thanks, Sandra from Carmignac as well. So thank you all for your commitment and your effort in improving this engagement. Thanks again, Chris from CFA Institute. Let me repeat that we have really appreciated your effort to be live with us, considering the fact that I imagine you have spent 3 hours on your night today. So thanks again. And I think that the contribution from everybody has been extremely useful. So I do recommend all our audience to be in contact with our speakers if somebody would like to go more in detail in some of the topics which have been discussed. Unfortunately, we do not have time to questions, but please contact our speakers and their investment management company if you like to go more in detail of something. On behalf of CFA Society Italy, I would like to thank you all. And you can, if you are interested in our activity, you can follow our newsletters, our website, our LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. For our initiatives. So thank you all, and good luck, and have a nice day for this Salone SRI. Thanks again.